COVID-19 vaccination protects you and those around you. When communities are vaccinated, fewer people get sick. Community immunity begins with each one of us. Visit vaccinate.wv.gov to learn more about COVID-19 vaccination. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, by the West Virginia University Extension information for the farm, garden, and home. COVID-19 vaccination protects you and those around you. When communities are vaccinated, fewer people get sick. Community immunity begins with each one of us. Visit vaccinate.wv.gov to learn more about COVID-19 vaccination. This message was brought to you by the West Virginia University Extension Service. Dan is away on military leave right now, so we're going to bring back some of our previous shows that didn't make it to the podcast. We hope that you enjoy them. As always, we welcome your feedback. If you'd like a written transcript of the show, please email me at Karen, Karen, .cox, COX, @mail, mail.wvu.edu, or call 304-234-3673. Thanks again for listening.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can maximize your profit on those animals that you're taking to auction. And one of those is by combining them into a combined feeder calf sale, wherein you are creating a larger pool of animals for a buyer to pick up all at once. Buyers do like to make sure they have a nice, evenly matched load so that they all grow and mature at similar rates. So feeder calf sales are one option for that. But you can also do some preconditioning. Preconditioning, like weaning and bunk breaking your calves, does add value. In fact, the preconditioned calves marketed through the West Virginia Quality Assurance Sales in 2017 averaged $105 per head more than the calves marketed at the regular sales. So preconditioning, while it does cost time and money, it can help you maximize the potential return on your animals. One way to increase your return through preconditioning is by making sure you're booking your inputs early. So you want to check the prices of feed very early and check them often, and then maybe buy them before the demand drives them higher in those busy months where you're trying to finish the calves off. You can even consider booking feed with your neighbors to receive volume discounts, but do make sure you have an agreement in writing saying that you're just splitting this feed and it doesn't form a partnership, that both of you sign. That's a pretty important document to have. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but just trust me on that one. All right, so you want to start looking at the feed prices pretty early as you think you would be willing to store them. And you're looking at, just for a difference as far as feeding 5 pounds per head per day for 45 days, if your price per ton is $300, your cost per head per day is 75 cents, so your total cost is $33.75. If it's $400 per ton, that's $1 per day per head, and that turns out to your total cost of $45 for 45 days. So you definitely want to make sure that you can maximize your returns by decreasing your inputs. Also, stockpiling forage is going to save you the most in feed resources. It's a very high quality feed, and it is the least expensive of all feeds to give your animals over the winter time. So do make sure that you are monitoring your regrowth for your fields and provide those calves and that post-weaning nutrition, that really high-quality feed that's available when you are stockpiling winter forage. Also, you want to think about your herd health program. Of course, the old saying goes, you have to spend money to make money or to save money in this case. And one of the best things you can do is make sure that your animals are healthy. and pre-vaccinating calves prior to weaning and prior to shipment reduces the treatment costs and adds value. You don't want to vaccinate your animals at weaning or during or right before shipment. Mostly because the animals get stressed during that time period. And while adding shots and a run through the chute increases that stress, it also decreases the effectiveness of the vaccine you're giving the animal. When the animal is in a high stress time of its life, such as weaning, then its immune system is not as open to working with these vaccines, and sometimes they have to be revaccinated once they get to their final destination. You also want to look at your break-even price. If you haven't calculated your break-even price by looking at the cost of your inputs and the final potential sale value of your animals, you don't really know if you are getting a good return on those animals. And, one of the things you want to do is make sure that you're getting a return, right? So there are a lot of expenses that go into monitoring an animal. And I know that some of you out there just don't want to know because you're worried to find out that you're not making a profit. But that's what you want to know. You want to know if you're not making a profit so you can start looking at what you're doing and how you're doing it so that you can turn things around and start making a better profit for your farm. Not knowing is not the right way to go. So you want to start by recording your preconditioning costs. Sources of expenses include grazed forage, hay, supplements, minerals, and your labor. Of course, include your labor. Convert all of those units to dollars per head per day so that, say, your supplement costs $400 per ton and you're feeding them 5 pounds per head per day. So it's going to cost you about $1 per head per day to feed supplement. And so you go through all of that and calculate out what you're putting into each animal per day. And that's going to give you the calculated cost of gain. And if your cost of gain is $1.13 per pound and they gain 2.5 pounds a day, that cost of gain goes down to 90 pounds if your anticipated daily gain is, say, 2 pounds per day. That changes things on how much they're gaining per day. So you do want to calculate your cost of gain. And if you have questions on how to calculate your break-even price or your cost of gain, I would be more than happy to help you with that. And a lot of it is just keeping records, keeping track of how much you spent on vaccines, how much time you spent giving the vaccines, and then how much they've eaten, how many mineral supplements they've needed. And all of that goes into figuring out how much you need to get at auction in order to break even, and then how much you need to get at auction in order to make a profit. And so I know farming isn't necessarily a profit-driven game for a lot of you out there, but you also don't want it to be putting you in the poorhouse. So making sure that you are making some profit on your animals is really important. So if you have questions on how to calculate your break-even costs and your desired profit to get at the auction house, please feel free to give me a call. My phone number at the Extension office is 304-234-3673, or you could reach me by email at Karen, Karen, .cox, COX, at mail.wvu.edu. That's Karen.cox at mail.wvu.edu. All right, so we're going to switch gears and go from cows to trees. All right, so when you are thinking about your timber harvest, it's definitely not something you want to make a decision on when someone shows up on your doorstep and says, "Hey, I'd like to buy your trees today." It's great that they're interested, and a lot of times it gets you thinking, and that sometimes you feel pressured to take advantage of this opportunity right now before there's a problem that happens to it. And I will tell you that you never want to sell your timber unless you do a sealed bid contract. And that means that you are asking several potential buyers to make you an offer on your timber. When it is sealed, the buyers are more likely to give you an accurate market value estimate than someone that just shows up at your door to say, "Hey, I want to buy your timber." Another thing you want to make sure that you're considering is the quality of the logger you're going to be working with. Now, one of the things I want to stress with you is that if you make a mistake raising a tomato, you have next season to fix that mistake. If you make a mistake with your cattle, you have some time to fix that mistake. If you make a mistake with a timber harvest, that mistake either will take a long time, at least 50 years to repair, or may never be repaired. So a bad timber harvest is something that is going to stick around for decades and generations. So it's not something to take lightly, and it's something you definitely want to think about your grandkids when you're considering. Even if you're just 25 and you inherited some land, consider your grandkids and what you want that land to be for them, because that is the return time for a forested area. So if you're wanting to do a timber harvest, I want you to really consider why you would do a timber harvest. Are you trying to establish a better forest stand? Are you trying to get a new forest started in an old field? Are you trying to develop wildlife habitat or recreational access by installing some trails? Are you trying to control your forest density so your trees grow faster and straighter? Are you trying to release some desirable trees from competing trees? Are you working to control some forest insects? So the emerald ash borer has come through and you need to take care of the ash that are dying out to control the damage that can be done by the falling trees. Or are you trying to improve the diversity in your woodland to reduce the issues of those invasive species coming through and taking out a large swath of the same type of tree? So all of that kind of leads into having a management tool. If you don't have a management plan for your forest or for your woodlot, I really want you to sit down and think about why it's important to you. What is important about that woodlot when it comes to your enjoyment, your quality of life, your family's future? What do you see when you look out into those trees? Do you see your retirement? Do you see your child's college education? Do you see a place where you just like to go and not talk to anyone? That happens too. You need to have all of those things in consideration to develop your management plan. That's going to be your roadmap. It's going to tell you when you should do what activities, and if you need to do harvesting, planting, thinning, fertilizing. All of those things can be written up in a management plan, because if you don't know what you're trying to get out of your forest, it's hard to say what actions need to take place. You can pretty easily say grapevine control and oriental bittersweet control are pretty essential to having a good, healthy forest stand. However, if you are looking to, say, develop really good bird habitat or wildlife habitat, you want to keep this little section of some grapevine. So a lot of it depends on what you want. But above all, before you start trying to sell timber or make contracts, you need to mark your boundaries. You need to have them professionally surveyed and identified and keep them marked. Knowing where your property starts and where your neighbor's property starts is really important, because you don't want to accidentally cut down trees that are on your neighbor's land. That causes all sorts of terrible things to happen. You also want to make sure your neighbor isn't cutting down trees on your land when you're not ready to have them harvested yet. So it's really important to know your boundaries and have them marked by a professional surveyor. Also, you want to know what you have to sell. So like I said earlier, when someone comes to your door and says, hey, I'll give you X $1,000 for your timber, and you go, wow, that sounds like a great number. Do you really know what you have in that woodlot? And while a lot of you have really good tree identification skills, and many of you may know how to measure a tree, it's very difficult to get an overall picture of how much timber is ready to be harvested in a woodlot and what its value is without working with a forester. So you're probably only going to do one timber harvest within your lifetime. So is it worth it to you to go through this process on your own and try to learn the entire field to be able to be sure you get a good value, or to hire a consultant forester who understands the field, knows which loggers are good, knows what the current values are, and can help you create a sound management plan? That's really going to be the way you want to go. Because like I said earlier, if you make a mistake during a timber harvest, it's going to be 50 to 100 years before you can see it repaired. And you probably will not see it fixed within your lifetime. So when you are choosing a person to come in and harvest your forest, you want to work with a quality logger. Having a bad logger and a good forest management plan is not going to do you any good at all. A poor logger can destroy your future plans for a forest. So you want to make sure you're working with a good logger, and you want to be able to. Some of the things you can look for are a proof of adequate workers' compensation and liability insurance coverage, making sure that they are properly insured means that they've taken a step to make sure their business is valid. Also, you want to make sure that they've taken some logger education training, some continuing education program. There's the Sharp Logger program and several others out there. Make sure that they're trying to stay on top of things and make sure that their staff is properly trained. You also want to ask them about best management practices and which ones they use. And that's going to tell you about how they will treat your property as they're going. There are certain best management practices that are required by West Virginia and Ohio law, and Pennsylvania law for that matter. But you need to know what those are. And your logger should be very well aware of what the law requires. And that could be another way for you to review with them whether or not they are a quality logger indeed. You also want to make sure that they have adequate equipment to do the job. I have seen some very small operations that do less than 5 acres, but you don't want someone who only has a chainsaw and a horse to log a 20-acre property, because you're not going to have that logging job finished for a long time. You want to know when the logging process is going to start and have an estimate as to when it's going to be done. And if they don't have the proper equipment, then that period is going to be very long indeed. What you want to make sure to avoid is that you don't have someone in the woods harvesting during the rainy periods of the year. When it's raining, the soil in the forest is very soft and it gets compacted very easily, especially with large logging equipment. And when you have compacted the soil, from your farmland, it takes about 7 years to undo. So you want to make sure that if you're going to work towards good quality regeneration in your forest, you want to make sure that you are not compacting your soils any more than they need to be during harvest. When the soils are frozen is actually the best time to do a harvest, but when the soils are dry is still fine. You don't want them in there when it's really wet and soggy. Also, you want to make sure that you check their references. Get a list of people they've done prior harvesting jobs and contact them. You really want to ask, okay, how was your land left? Were there any problems during the harvest? Where did they park their equipment? Did they leave trash behind? Did they wear protective equipment when they were doing the harvesting? That's really important because you don't want these loggers to get hurt while they're doing a logging job on your property. You want to make sure that they're taking good care of their employees. They have the proper protective equipment like chaps and hard hats. And you also want to ask how the trees that were not supposed to be harvested, how are they protected? How did they leave their skid trails, the landings, the haul roads? Did they reseed the landing? Are the skid trails well made? Are they, will they be willing to work with you if you want them to remain open pathways? Say you want to go hunting and you want to have a nice path for your ATV to go out. Do keep in mind, though, if you're creating ATV trails in your forest, you probably will not be the only person using them. So do be very careful with that and make sure that you understand what you're setting yourself up for should you develop a really good ATV trail system through your forest. A lot of times the loggers can be asked to leave blockades across the trails to reduce the amount of erosion caused by unwanted ATV traffic. But again, that's something you need to have written in your sale agreement with the logger. So other things you need to make sure that are in that written sale agreement is that you need to have a good description of the land with the boundary lines and a guarantee of title, proving that you own that property. You also want to have a specification of payment terms. When are they getting paid? How much are they getting paid? When are you getting paid? How much are you getting paid? You know, they are buying this wood from you, and they're valuable trees, so you want to make sure that you know exactly when you're going to get paid. You don't want them to pay you after they sell it, because it may sit in their logging yard for 2 years before it gets to a timber yard, and could be seriously depleted in quality by that time. So you want to make sure you know exactly when you're going to get paid. Also, a description of the timber and the method of designating trees to be cut and the harvesting method. You want to know if they're going to be using tracked skid steers or tired skidders, because those can have different compaction opportunities. So the skid steers are definitely going to have the tracked skid steers are going to have a lower compaction, but they're also much more expensive to operate. So it just depends on if you are in a lower area where there is often soggy soil, you definitely want to enforce the requirement of a skidded steer or a tracked skid steer to get the logs out, as opposed to tires. You also want to make sure that you specify the penalties for damage and for the removal of unmarked trees. You know, you don't want to take all this time to go in and mark the trees that you want removed and have an idea in your head of the trees that are supposed to stay. And, you know, you come back out and all of the trees are gone, except for a couple spindly, unfortunate looking trees. That is definitely a problem, and you need to know, or your logger needs to know, what the penalty for that is going to be. Also, you need to assign liability for losses caused by the timber buyer or his agents. You need to include the requirement for the use of best management practices and adherence to all local, state, and federal laws. And then after you have a good contract and you've done a sealed bid sale, hopefully you've worked with a forester to help find the best loggers, the best value, and get your trees marked to give you the best forest when it's all over. You want to actually supervise the harvest. Now, a consultant forester often will do this for you. They know what the timber agreement is, and they know what to look for signs of problems. But also, if you go out and you're supervising the harvest, it gives you an opportunity to get to know the logger, and you can work with that logger to help you get a better sense of your objectives, and then they can do a better job to help support those objectives. You should periodically inspect the harvest site, making sure it's being conducted within compliance of the law, and also identify any potential problems early. If you see there's a road that's starting to get rutted, it's much easier for a logger to go through and re-slope that road before a huge rut is running down the middle of it. When the harvest is complete, you want to go through and conduct a final inspection to make sure that everything is in order and they've followed the best management practices. So with that, I am out of time. We'll catch you next time.
Do you have questions about the COVID-19 vaccination? Do you want to know who can get it, where to get it, or do you have general questions about COVID-19 vaccines? Vaccinate.wv.gov has the info you are looking for. You can also call the West Virginia COVID-19 Vaccine Info Line to talk to a representative and find out more at 1-833-734-0965. Again, that's vaccinate.wv.gov or 1-833-734-0965 to get your COVID-19 vaccination questions answered. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.